G'day you mob, how's it going? Welcome to this episode of Pete vs. Plants. I am Pete and these are the plants. Now I am finally doing an update video on my Alocasias in Leca. You guys have been asking for this repeatedly on the previous video, which I will link up above. If you haven't seen that, obviously go and check it out. But the long and the short of it was that I was having trouble with some of my Alocasias that were getting root rot. From memory, a lot of them were left in the original substrate that they came in, and you know, no shit Sherlock, that was my issue, that the watering regime that I kind of have and that I'm used to with the chunky aeroid mix that I use with most of my plants wasn't suitable for the very, very dense nursery mix that these guys were in. And so I moved 3 of them across, at least these 3 here, into Leca to see if this would kind of remedy the problem. So we have my Alocasia micholitziana here, which has finally sprouted out a new leaf. We have the Stingray Alocasia here as well. This has shot out loads of leaves. I'll go through them one by one in a sec. And we also have my scalprum, my Samar Lance, right? The Alocasia scalprum. So first and foremost, I guess, yeah, my favorite Alocasia is the scalprum. I am an absolutely massive fan of these plants. The leaves just look like crocodile skin. They're leathery. They're just absolutely stunning. This isn't the best specimen, and I have quite a few sitting around now. I should just get a big one. So here's one that I have in some chunky aeroid mix. It wasn't having a good time. It had sort of flowered, so I think I bought this as a rescue. So the first one that I think I ever got was one of the 2 that are in here, and you can see it didn't fare very well. And then I saw that the Bunnings where I got them had also run into the same problem I had and overwatered the shit out of them. And all of them were sort of having a bad time of it. So I purchased this one there and transferred it directly from immediately, because I was like, hello, the root rot problem is real. Transferred it immediately from the substrate it was in into chunky aeroid mix. It seemed to be doing okay, but it was just flowering. So it flowered, shot out 3 flowers. I chopped them off. I'm sort of worried that it's flowering again, but I don't think it is. So chopped the flowers off, but it sort of stressed it out and stopped it from growing for ages. So it did nothing for months and months and months and months and months. And then finally the other day, it was starting to work on a new leaf here. So it seems to be happy. This leaf seems really large, really healthy. I think this is probably another leaf. It sort of looks like that's going to be a leaf. Usually it's a little more sort of bulbous around the top here and consistent in color if it's going to be an inflorescence. So I think I can sort of see veining on the inside there, which suggests to me it's probably another leaf, which is great. But yeah, they come out looking like this, you know, forgive the yellow on these older leaves, but it's literally like leather, right? And it feels as you would imagine that it feels. It's just phenomenal. So when you get a nice specimen that has large leaves and a lot of them, it's just an amazing, amazing, amazing Alocasia. So this is definitely my favorite. So that was the reason that I tried to save the original one or 2 that I had here. I'm not sure. I think this might have been the original plant here, right? You can see that that's quite a large, I don't think it's a corm, but the base of the plant there. And the other side here, I'm not sure if this was a corm or not. These may have actually been 2 plants planted into the same one, but either way, yeah. So I've chucked this in Leca. I think in both cases, the roots had actually completely rotted off. And so these were just sort of bulbs and they weren't doing anything for ages because this happened during sort of the winter period here in Australia. So they'd probably gone dormant. But as you can see, they took to Leca really well and have shot out loads and loads of roots. So yeah, and originally the watermark was sort of here and the roots were non-existent or, you know, just very, very limited in their size. And I've just allowed them to sort of grow down in here. So I'm not sure what happens with the roots if they are sort of normal roots up here where they are surrounded by air. And then when they grow down into the liquid, into the reservoir, they become sort of water roots and it's not too much of a problem. So far, I haven't had, at least from what I can see, any root rot issues here. There's algae, obviously. I need to probably give it a flush and a clean. But yeah, I kind of didn't want to do too much to it whilst the plant was shooting out the two plants were shooting out its new leaves, and they seem to be doing well. So really happy with this one, and it'll be interesting to sort of compare how they go, although they are different sizes, to see if these guys do grow quicker, because that's what I keep hearing, that hydro allows plants to grow way more rapidly than soil. So the Samar Lance. Okay, the next one was the Stingray here, and it was the same story, right? So we had root rot, it was just not having a good time of it, so I decided to transplant it into Leca. Loads of the leaves died off, but pretty quickly it started shooting out new growth. And the interesting thing is that it's actually shot out quite sort of short, stout growth. The leaves are about the same size as I think they were previously, but they haven't grown very long petioles, which is kind of cool. I wanted a sort of shorter, bushier plant, and I'm not sure if that's about the nutrients, the substrate, or probably most likely the amount of light that it's getting. It's probably getting loads of light now, and so it doesn't really have to reach for it. But this one's been a pretty voracious grower. The roots have absolutely gone bananas. Again, same sort of deal. I had the reservoir here and I just kept refilling it to here, and the roots, as you can see, just grew like crazy down into the reservoir. It's probably been about 3 or 4 months. I've removed loads of leaves, I think probably 3 or 4 other leaves that were growing off the side of this plant that slowly sort of wilted away or turned yellow. I've removed those. It's out of the 1 leaf club, it's holding onto 3 leaves, it's looking good, so knock on wood. But yeah, this seems to be doing really well in Leca. So again, another one for the passive hydro box for Alocasias. And the last one is this frydek. Now this was having a shit time for a long time in here. It pretty quickly after putting it into semi-hydro, it sent down a root system and did pretty well establishing itself, but the leaves all just slowly drooped down. I think it had about 3 leaves, 2 of which may have been yellowing, and the third one was looking good. It was probably about a third bigger than this one on here. It held on to that last third one for a while, and then eventually that one sort of yellowed and died down, sort of drooping down. It had done this kind of really weird kind of loop-de-loop curl, and the leaf was still there. And I was sort of waiting for it to really yellow off and sort of just atrophy and fall off. And it took ages for that to really happen. But then the weird thing was, as you can probably see here, it flowered. Like, it flowered with no leaves. So once that third leaf had kind of rolled all the way down and was effectively dead, it decided to shoot out an inflorescence. And so, yeah, that was kind of really bizarre, and it was really quick too. I was actually quite surprised at how quickly that came up and then just died off. Like it opened up and then just carked it pretty quickly. So anyway, I removed that, and then the other day when I was doing that, I noticed it's obviously sending out some corms here. And I hadn't even seen this one until today, but I had seen this one growing up against the side of the glass and was like, I think this is the only sort of downside to growing these guys in Leca, especially in these sort of, well, I guess it doesn't make too much of a difference in terms of vessel size, right? I was thinking, yeah, closed vessel, maybe it's a little less wide. What am I thinking of? Thinner? Narrower, maybe? So yeah, I'm not sure what to do. I wanted to ask you guys, do you have advice for growing Alocasias in Leca and what you do with the corms, especially if you want them to sort of grow out and start shooting up growth? Like, is this a problem, or is this just a matter of time of just me leaving it alone and it will push out this leaf? It'll probably be a bit janky, but then it'll eventually start, you know, sending out more growth that'll look a lot nicer? Or is it the kind of thing that I need to get in there and start digging around and giving it a hand? Because yeah, I wasn't really sure what to do. The thing that I have noticed since I saw this about, I don't know, a week or 2 ago, is that it has actually risen up and the petiole here is now above the Leca, so I think it is going to sort of pull itself out and do okay. And surprisingly, the leaf kind of looks pretty intact. It is scrunched up, but it doesn't look like it's been ripped up loads by the Leca. So that's just something interesting that I sort of noticed happen, and I'm sort of curious to see what's going to happen next. But yeah, again, as you can see, they just went off. These Alocasias have shot out these roots and they've gone absolutely bananas. Now, the other thing, the last thing to mention was that when I was pulling the Stingray here out of soil, one thing I did notice, and I think I can see another corm coming out. I'm not sure if you can see that in there, but that looks to me like it's about to send out a corm as well on that side. I'll have to sort of inspect these a little more closely. but cool. The thing that we found, I think we found like 5 or 6 corms that were just sitting there, and they had root systems, which was really cool. So yeah, that was the first time that I had found corms off an Alocasia where they each had really established root systems. Like the roots on them were like this long, maybe even longer on those corms. So what I ended up doing was taking the corms out, chucking them in a prop box, and within like 2 or 3 weeks, guys, they had shot out growth. It was that quick. And the cool thing, the other thing that I've noticed that may be good information for you guys is don't be afraid to chuck Alocasia corms or cuttings or whatever into sphagnum moss. Because one thing that I have noticed is that for some reason, the morphology of their roots is way easier to separate. It makes them way easier to separate from the moss. So the other day I pulled out, I think it was about maybe 6 pink dragon Alocasia corms from moss, and I'd put them in there thinking this is going to be a nightmare, but I just chucked them in a prop box. And the other day I came back and they had all popped, they all had leaves coming out, and I was like, okay, this is going to take quite a while to separate them. But they all just, like, I pulled them up and the roots just all came out of the moss, and I was just like, okay, that makes life easier. And it was the same thing for the Stingray ones that I had put into moss as well. They were very, very quick to be able to separate out. Other things like the philodendrons and monsteras are a total nightmare and take forever, but Alocasia, for some reason, I think it must be just the way in which their roots grow in that environment. They're not as perhaps hairy, and they don't, send out as many bifurcations all over the place, those extra sort of secondary roots, and they don't become knotted up, so they're easier to separate. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for this one with these Alocasias. Passive hydro seems to be an absolute winner when it comes to reviving Alocasias from the brink of death, or just having them in here and growing them in here full stop. I'd recommend you give it a go. The next step for me, I think, is trying pon. Let's choose a pon or the equivalent. I think it's called MAD. There's an Australian equivalent that I need to get my hands on and give a go. But yeah, if you have any comments or anything to add, leave a comment down below. And in the meantime, go check out this video and I will see you next time. Ciao.